She was invisible, just a maid in a black dress and white apron, dusting the sins off a billionaire's furniture. But Emily Andrea saw everything. She saw the bruises the mistresses tried to hide. She saw the ledger books left open on the mahogany desk. And this morning, through the reflection of a hallway mirror, she saw the driver check his holster and wipe sweat from his upper lip 3 times in 1 minute. When the most dangerous man in New York, Julian Thorne, walked toward the elevator, Emily didn't just see a boss, she saw a walking corpse. She had 2 seconds to make a choice: stay invisible and live, or speak up and become a target. She stepped forward. She reached for his neck, and she whispered the words that would burn the city to the ground. The penthouse at the top of the obsidian tower didn't smell like a home. It smelled like cold, filtered air, lemon polish, and the faint, metallic tang of gun oil. Emily Andrea hated the silence. In a house this big, 6,000 square feet of glass and steel overlooking Central Park, silence wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. Emily, the housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, snapped, pointing a manicured finger at the foyer. "Mr. Thorne is leaving in 10 minutes. Ensure the console table is spotless. Not a speck of dust." "Yes, ma'am," Emily murmured, keeping her head down. Emily was 24, with eyes the color of dark coffee and hands that were roughened by years of scrubbing floors. She had taken this job with the Thorne Agency because the pay was triple the industry standard. She didn't ask why. You didn't ask why when you worked for Julian Thorne. You just cleaned the blood if you found it, and you pretended it was spilled wine. Julian Thorne was the capo of the syndicate's Eastern Division, though the newspapers called him a logistics consultant. He was 32, 6'3", and built like a Greek statue carved out of malice. He terrified Emily. She moved to the foyer, her rag moving in rhythmic circles on the marble table. That's when she saw him. Marcus, the head driver. He was standing by the private elevator doors, waiting for the boss. Marcus was usually a stone wall, unmoving, unblinking. But today, he was vibrating. Emily paused, watching him through the reflection of the large gilded mirror on the wall. Marcus tapped his earpiece. He adjusted his jacket. He reached inside his blazer, touching the grip of his shoulder-holstered Glock, then pulled his hand away, as if the metal burned him. He checked his watch. He wiped sweat from his upper lip. Nervous tick. Emily knew that look. She had seen it on her father's face the night he left, to pay a gambling debt, and never came back. It was the look of a man who had sold his soul and was waiting for the receipt. He's going to do it, Emily thought, her blood turning to ice. Today. The heavy double doors of the master suite opened. Julian Thorne stepped out. The air in the room seemed to get heavier. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that probably cost more than Emily's entire life earnings. His face was sharp angles and cold indifference. His dark hair swept back perfectly. He was on a call, a Bluetooth earpiece blinking in his ear. "If the shipment is light, cut off their fingers. I don't care, Rico. Send a message," Julian said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth as velvet wrapping a knife. He hung up and strode toward the elevator, toward Marcus. Marcus stiffened. "Morning, sir. Car is ready." "Good," Julian said, not even looking at the driver. He adjusted his cuffs, his gaze fixed on the elevator numbers. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. If she said nothing, Julian would get in that car. If Marcus was nervous, it wasn't a shooting. A shooter is focused. A man who is nervous is afraid of collateral damage. A bomb. It had to be. Julian was 5 steps away from the elevator. 4. Emily dropped her rag. "Sir!" The word tore out of her throat before she could stop it. Julian stopped. He turned slowly, his grey eyes landing on her like the crosshairs of a sniper rifle. He looked annoyed. "What?" Marcus glared at her. "The boss is in a hurry, girl. Get back to work." Emily ignored the driver. She walked right up to Julian Thorne. It was suicide. You didn't approach him. You didn't touch him. "Your tie," Emily said, her voice trembling. It's crooked, sir." Julian frowned. He reached up to touch the knot of his silk tie. It was perfectly straight. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "It feels fine." "Please," she said, stepping into his personal space. She smelled expensive sandalwood and danger. She reached up, her small hands trembling as she took hold of his tie. Marcus took a step forward, his hand going to his jacket. "Hey, step away." Emily tightened the knot, pulling Julian's face down slightly toward hers. She looked him dead in the eye. The fear in her eyes was real, but the intensity was pleading. "Your driver has a gun," she whispered, barely moving her lips, her hands busy fixing the perfect knot. "And he's sweating. Don't get in the car." Julian went still. He didn't flinch. He didn't look at Marcus. He just stared at Emily. He saw the terror in her pupils. He saw the way her pulse was jumping in her throat. "There," Emily said loudly, stepping back and smoothing his lapel. "Much better, sir." Julian straightened up. He looked at her for one long, agonizing second. Then a mask of boredom slid over his face. "Thank you," he said coldly. He turned back to Marcus. "Let's go, sir," Marcus said, pressing the elevator button. "Running late." Julian checked his Rolex. "Actually, Marcus, I forgot the files for the merger. They're on my desk." "I can run and get them, sir," Marcus offered quickly. "No," Julian said. "I need to find them. You take the car down. Bring it around to the front. I'll take the service elevator down in 5 minutes." Marcus hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "Sir, security protocol says—" "I said bring the car around, Marcus." Julian's voice dropped an octave. It wasn't a request. "Yes, boss." The elevator dinged. Marcus stepped in. The doors closed. The moment they shut, the atmosphere in the penthouse shifted from cold to volcanic. Julian turned to Emily. He didn't thank her. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron, and pulled her away from the foyer, dragging her behind the heavy marble pillar. "Who are you?" he hissed, pinning her against the wall. "Who sent you?" "No one," Emily gasped. "I just saw—" Boom! The floor beneath them shook. A dull, thudding roar echoed up the elevator shaft, vibrating through the steel bones of the obsidian tower. The sound of shattering glass could be heard from the streets below. 20 stories down, the car had exploded in the underground garage. Silence returned to the penthouse. But this time it was ringing. Julian didn't let go of her wrist. He looked at the elevator doors, then back at Emily. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown. He was alive, and he knew exactly how close he had come to dying. "You just saved my life," he whispered, sounding almost offended. "Now give me one good reason why I shouldn't put a bullet in your head to keep you quiet." Emily couldn't breathe. The shockwave from the explosion was still rattling the crystal chandelier in the dining room, but the man pinning her to the wall was far more volatile. "I asked you a question," Julian growled. He pulled a silver handgun from his waistband. Emily hadn't even noticed it there, and held it at his side. He wasn't pointing it at her yet, but the threat was screaming in the air. "How did you know?" "He was sweating!" Emily cried out, tears pricking her eyes. He checked his holster 3 times. He kept looking at his watch. My father used to look like that before he did something stupid." Julian studied her face, searching for a lie. He was a human lie detector. He had built an empire on reading bluffs, but all he saw in Emily's face was raw, unadulterated panic. "Boss?" The security team burst through the stairwell door, weapons drawn. 3 men in tactical gear. The lead guard, a brute named Silas, scanned the room. "Report!" Julian barked, not looking away from Emily. "Car bomb, sir," Silas said, breathless. There's not much left of Marcus, or the Mercedes. The garage is compromised. We need to move you, now." Julian finally released Emily's wrist. Her skin was red where his fingers had been. "Secure the perimeter," Julian ordered. "Get the SUV. We're going to the safe house in Tribeca." "Sir, what about the staff?" Silas asked, gesturing to the cowering Mrs. Higgins and the other maids who had gathered in the hallway, screaming. Julian looked at Emily. She was rubbing her wrist, shrinking against the wall, trying to become invisible again. But she couldn't. She had crossed the line. She was a witness. She was a loose end. "Let the others go home," Julian said. He pointed the barrel of his gun slightly toward Emily. "She comes with us." "What?" "No!" Emily shouted, backing away. "I didn't do anything. I saved you." "Exactly," Julian said, his voice void of emotion. "Which means you know too much. You know someone on the inside turned Marcus. You saw the signs. You're an asset, Emily. Or you're a spy. Until I figure out which, you belong to me. I'm not going anywhere with you." Julian took a step forward, towering over her. "There are people out there who just tried to turn me into ash. If they find out a maid ruined their plan, how long do you think you'll last on the street? An hour? Maybe 2? Emily froze. He was right. "Get in the car," Julian said. "Or stay here and explain to the police, and my enemies, why you're the only one who knew about the bomb." Emily looked at the door, then at Julian. She realized with a sinking feeling that her life as a simple maid was over. The moment she touched that tie, she had signed a contract in blood. 10 minutes later, she was in the back of an armored black SUV, sandwiched between Julian and Silas. The city of New York blurred past the tinted windows. Sirens wailed in the distance, heading toward the tower they just fled. Julian was on his phone, his voice calm, terrifyingly composed. "It was the Moretti family," Julian said into the phone. "Marcus was on their payroll. I want his apartment tossed. I want his phone records. And find out who supplied the C4. He hung up and glanced at Emily. She was hugging her knees, staring out the window. "Stop shaking," he said. "I can't," she snapped, surprising herself. "I'm not like you. I don't almost die before breakfast every day." A flicker of amusement crossed Julian's face. "No, you just clean up after people who do." He reached into the minibar console of the SUV and poured a glass of amber liquid. He held it out to her. "Drink. It helps." Emily stared at the glass. "I don't want your drink. It's whiskey, aged 20 years, probably worth more than your rent." "My rent is paid on time, and it doesn't come with car bombs," she retorted. Julian actually chuckled. It was a dark, dry sound. He downed the drink himself. "You have a sharp tongue for a maid, Emily Andrea. You know my last name. I know everything about everyone who enters my house," he said. "Emily Andrea. Father, deceased. Mother, in a care facility in Queens. You dropped out of nursing school to pay her bills. You have no criminal record, no parking tickets, and you're allergic to strawberries." Emily felt violated. "Is that supposed to impress me?" "It's supposed to warn you," Julian said, his eyes hardening again. "I am thorough. So if you are working for the Morettis, if this saving me act is a way to get closer to me to finish the job later, I will find out, and I will make you regret being born." The SUV swerved sharply. "Contact!" Silas shouted from the front seat. "2 bikes coming up fast on the rear. MP5s. Bullets raked across the back of the SUV, pinging loudly against the bulletproof glass. Emily screamed and ducked. "Stay down!" Julian roared. He didn't look scared. He looked energized. He reached under the seat and pulled out a submachine gun. "They didn't just want to kill me," Julian said, racking the slide of the weapon. "They wanted to make sure I was dead. This is a coordinate hit." He looked at Emily, huddled on the floor mat. "Welcome to the family, Emily," he muttered. "Try not to get shot." The SUV was a tank, but even tanks have weak spots. The motorcycles were weaving through traffic, firing at the tires. "Silas, burn them," Julian ordered. The driver slammed the brakes. The SUV fishtailed. The motorcycle behind them couldn't stop in time. It slammed into the reinforced bumper of the SUV with a sickening crunch. The rider went flying over the car. "One down!" Silas yelled. He floored the gas, merging onto the highway ramp, leaving the chaos behind. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a nondescript warehouse in the meat-packing district. The garage door opened automatically, and the SUV rolled into the dark, concrete belly of the building. Julian dragged Emily out of the car before it even fully stopped. "Upstairs." "Now," he commanded. They entered a loft that looked like a military bunker, disguised as a bachelor pad. Exposed brick, leather couches, and a wall of monitors showing CCTV footage of the city. Julian shoved Emily toward a chair in the center of the room. "Sit." "I need to call my mum," Emily said, her voice shaking. "She worries if I don't check in at noon." "Your mum is safe. I have a team watching her facility," Julian said. Emily stood up, fury overriding her fear. "You put people near my mother. Call them off." "Sit down." Julian slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Emily sat. Julian paced around her, like a shark circling a swimmer. He had taken off his jacket. His white shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing tattoos on his forearms, symbols Emily didn't recognize, but knew meant violence. "Marcus was with me for 5 years," Julian said quietly. "He was loyal, or I thought he was. He had a gambling debt. The Morettis bought him." He stopped in front of her. He leaned down, placing his hands on the arms of her chair, trapping her. His face was inches from hers. She could see the flecks of gold in his steel-grey eyes. "How did you see what I didn't?" he asked. "I am trained to see threats. I was raised in this life. You wash floors. How did you see the tell?" Emily swallowed hard. She looked at his lips, then his eyes. "Because you look for enemies, Mr. Thorne. You look for hate." "And what do you look for?" "I look for pain," she whispered. "People in pain make mistakes." Marcus was in pain. He looked like he wanted to throw up. He touched the gun not because he wanted to use it, but because he was afraid of it. Julian stared at her. For the first time, the cold calculation in his eyes softened, replaced by genuine curiosity. "You're observant," he murmured, "and brave. Stupid, but brave." He stood up and walked to a sideboard, pouring a glass of water. He handed it to her. "Drink." She took it. Her hands were shaking so much the water splashed over the rim. "The Morettis think I'm dead," Julian said, looking at the monitors. "The news is reporting the explosion. They won't know I escaped for another hour, maybe 2. That gives us a window." "A window to do what?" Emily asked. "To strike back," Julian said darkly. "But I can't do it alone. My inner circle is compromised. I don't know who to trust. Silas is loyal, but he's muscle, not a thinker." He turned to her. "I need eyes, Emily. I need someone who sees what others miss." Emily laughed, a hysterical, high-pitched sound. "You're joking. I'm a maid. I'm not a mobster consort." "You're not a maid anymore," Julian said. "You're the woman who saved the Don. That makes you a target for them, and a curiosity for me." Suddenly, the lights in the warehouse flickered. The monitors went black. "Silas!" Julian yelled. No answer. "Silas!" Julian drew his gun instantly. He moved to Emily, grabbing her arm and pulling her off the chair. "Get behind the couch. Stay low." "What's happening?" "They found us," Julian hissed. "The tracker. They must have put a tracker on the SUV during the chase." The heavy steel doors of the warehouse loft began to screech. Sparks flew as someone used a thermal lance to cut through the lock. "There's no way out," Emily whispered, looking around. "There is," Julian said. He looked at a ventilation grate high on the wall. "But you're going to have to trust me." "I don't trust you." "Then trust that I'm the only thing standing between you and the men who want to peel your skin off," Julian said grimly. The door burst open. Smoke grenades rolled in. Julian fired blindly into the smoke. "Move! Climb the shelf!" He boosted her up toward the ventilation shaft. Emily scrambled, her fingernails tearing against the metal. She kicked the grate open and pulled herself up. She looked down. Julian was holding his ground, firing his handgun with precision, dropping bodies as they emerged from the smoke. But there were too many of them. "Go!" Julian shouted at her. "Crawl to the roof." "Come with me!" she screamed. "I can't fit," he yelled back. A bullet clipped his shoulder. He grunted, stumbling back. Emily made a choice. She wasn't going to leave him. She reached into her apron pocket, where she kept her cleaning supplies. She pulled out a small, heavy spray bottle of industrial-strength ammonia she used for tough stains. "Hey!" she screamed at the men below. Two gunmen looked up. Emily hurled the bottle down. It smashed on the concrete right in front of them, exploding in a cloud of blinding, choking fumes. The men gagged, clawing at their eyes. Julian seized the distraction. He vaulted onto the shelving unit, ignoring his bleeding shoulder, and grabbed Emily's outstretched hand. He hauled himself up into the vent, just as a hail of bullets shredded the spot where he had been standing. They were in the dark, cramped shaft, breathing heavy, their bodies pressed together in the tight space. "You threw cleaning supplies at hitmen," Julian wheezed, looking at her in the dark. "It was ammonia," Emily said, panting. "It burns." Julian started to laugh. It was a breathless, adrenaline-fueled laugh. He leaned his forehead against hers. "Remind me to give you a raise." But the moment was cut short. They could hear footsteps running on the roof above them. "They're not just inside," Julian whispered. "They've surrounded the building. We have to jump." "Jump?" Emily squeaked. "Jump where?" "To the next building," Julian said. "It's a 10-foot gap. Can you make it?" Emily looked at him. "Do I have a choice?" "No." "Then let's go." The rooftop wind bit through Emily's thin Maid uniform as Julian Thorne, blood staining his white shirt, pushed open the metal access hatch. The night sky above the meatpacking district was a bruised purple, light pollution blurring the stars. Below, the street glowed with the frantic blue and red of police sirens converging on the warehouse they had just vacated. "Move," Julian grunted, his voice strained from the shoulder wound. He emerged first, scanning the surrounding rooftops. The adjacent building, a grim, brick-faced structure, loomed 10 feet away, its own roof a chaotic jungle of ventilation units and rusty fire escapes. 10 feet is a long way, Mr. Thorne, Emily whispered, clutching her chest. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. "It's Julian," he corrected, turning to her. "And it's either that or a bullet to the head. Your choice." Before she could answer, a burst of gunfire erupted from the open hatch they'd just exited. The Moretti men had found their way onto the roof. "Get ready," Julian said, his eyes hard. He took a running start, launching himself across the chasm between the buildings. He landed heavily on the other side, rolling to absorb the impact, then instantly scrambling to his feet, handgun ready. "Your turn, Emily," he shouted over the wind and the renewed gunfire. Emily stared at the gap. 10 feet. It felt like an ocean. Her legs felt like lead. She'd never jumped anything larger than a puddle. "I can't!" she screamed, fear seizing her throat. "You can!" Julian roared back, firing a warning shot over the heads of the advancing gunmen. "You saved me once today. Don't get yourself killed now. Jump!" Bullets began to chip away at the concrete wall beside her. Emily closed her eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and ran. She launched herself forward, a desperate cry escaping her lips. For a terrifying second, she was airborne, the wind whipping at her face, the concrete below a dizzying blur. Her fingers scraped against the rough edge of the opposite roof. She was short. Too short. She cried out as she began to slip. Julian, seeing her fall, threw his gun down and lunged, catching her wrists just as her feet left the edge. Her entire body dangled precariously over the 20-story drop. "Hold on," he grunted, his face contorted with effort. His shoulder wound screamed in protest, threatening to give way. His grip was slipping, his shirt tearing. Emily looked down, the city light spinning beneath her. She was going to die. "Kick!" Julian yelled, his voice raw. "Kick your feet! Get traction!" Emily thrashed, her boots scraping against the brick wall. Her fingers were numb, her arms burning. With a final, desperate heave, Julian pulled her up, her body slamming onto the roof beside him. They lay there for a moment, chests heaving, adrenaline coursing through them. The gunmen on the other roof were still firing, but they were too far away for an accurate shot. Julian slowly pushed himself up, wincing from his shoulder. He retrieved his gun, then looked at Emily, who was still gasping for air, tears streaming down her face. "You made it," he said, a ghost of a smirk touching his lips. "Barely." You threw your gun down for me," Emily gasped, wiping her eyes. "Don't get used to it," Julian said, though his eyes held a strange, unreadable depth. He helped her up, his touch gentler this time. "Let's move. We're not safe yet." They navigated the labyrinthine rooftops for another hour, moving stealthily from building to building, until Julian finally led them to a hidden fire escape that descended into a quiet alleyway. A nondescript black sedan, unlike the armored SUV, was waiting, idling. A new driver, a young man named Marco, jumped out. "Mr. Thorne, thank God!" Marco exclaimed, seeing Julian's bloody shoulder. "Silas, he didn't make it out. They overwhelmed the warehouse." Julian's face hardened. Silas had been with him for years, another casualty of the Moretti vendetta. "Get us out of here, Marco," Julian ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Take us to the safe house in the Bronx, and make sure we're not followed." As the sedan sped through the dimly lit streets, Emily felt a strange detachment. Just hours ago, she was a maid, polishing furniture. Now she was a fugitive, riding shotgun with a Mafia boss, having survived a car bomb, a gunfight, and a death-defying leap across rooftops. Her old life felt like a dream. They arrived at a dilapidated brownstone in a quiet residential neighborhood. From the outside, it looked abandoned, but inside, it was a fortified fortress. Steel doors, reinforced windows, and a sophisticated surveillance system were seamlessly integrated into the decaying facade. Julian led Emily into a dimly lit living room, sparsely furnished but functional. He peeled off his bloodied shirt, revealing a powerful, scarred torso. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, a nasty flesh wound, but not critical. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a worn leather armchair. "I need to clean this." Emily watched him, mesmerized despite herself. The raw power, the controlled pain in his movements. He was a predator, yes, but a wounded one. "Let me help," she found herself saying, surprising them both. Julian paused, a sterile gauze pad in his hand. You're a maid, not a medic. I was in nursing school, Emily reminded him softly, for 2 years. Before I had to drop out. He looked at her, considering. He saw the genuine offer, not a ploy. Fine, he conceded. But if you try anything, Emily. I'm not trying anything, Julian, she said, stepping closer. Just trying to clean up your mess. She took the gauze, her hand steady despite the lingering fear. She cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency, her fingers brushing against his warm skin. She felt the ripple of his muscles under her touch. He watched her closely, his eyes never leaving her face. The air between them crackled with an unspoken tension, a dangerous intimacy born of shared trauma. You're good at this, he admitted, his voice low. I had to be, Emily replied, applying a fresh bandage. My mother has diabetes. She's prone to infections. I learned to be careful. So you care for people, Julian mused, leaning back in the chair, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. You clean up their wounds, you polish their world, you save their lives. He paused. But who cleans up after you, Emily? The question hung in the air, unexpected and poignant. Emily looked away, her own pain a raw ache in her chest. No one, she whispered. No one ever does. Julian reached out, his uninjured hand brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. His touch was hesitant, almost tender. For a fleeting moment, the dangerous Mafia boss was just a man, vulnerable and exposed. Maybe, he said, his gaze locking with hers. That's about to change. The safe house became Emily's gilded cage. Days bled into nights, filled with the low hum of Julian's hushed phone calls, the clack of his keyboard, and the occasional visit from one of his grim-faced enforcers. She was no longer polishing silver or scrubbing floors. She was an uninvited guest, a witness, and a strange, reluctant confidant. Julian rarely left the safe house, coordinating his counterattack from the fortress. Emily, meanwhile, felt her mind sharpen. She listened. She observed. She saw the patterns, the subtle shifts in Julian's demeanor when a call went bad, the way his jaw tightened when a name like Moretti was mentioned. One evening, about a week after the explosion, Julian was pacing the living room, a map of the city spread across the coffee table. He was on the phone, his voice a low growl. The Morettis are hitting all my legitimate fronts, he said into the receiver. The construction sites, the shipping manifests. Someone inside is feeding them intelligence. Someone high up. He slammed the phone down in frustration. He ran a hand through his dark hair, looking weary. They're anticipating my every move, Julian muttered, more to himself than to Emily, who was quietly reading a medical textbook she'd found in a dusty corner. It's like they have a direct line to my planning room. Emily slowly closed her book. Who knows your plans, Julian? He turned to her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He wasn't used to her interjecting. My inner council, Rico, Enzo, and Angelo, my closest advisors, men I've known my whole life. And Marco? Emily asked, remembering the young driver who had picked them up. Marco is new, loyal but green. He just drives. He doesn't know strategic details. What about security? Emily pressed. Who handles the technical side? The surveillance? The communication networks? Julian frowned. That would be Enzo. He's a tech wizard. Built all our encrypted networks. He handles all the secure lines. Emily's mind went back to the warehouse, to the flickering lights, the monitors going black, the thermal lance. When we were at the warehouse, Julian, she began slowly. The power went out before they breached the doors. And then the monitors. Wouldn't that be a security breach that Enzo would notice? Julian paused, His brow furrowed in thought. He would. But he claimed it was an EMP, a localized blast that took out the grid. An EMP that only affected your warehouse and not the street outside? Emily asked, her voice quiet but firm. And then they found your safe house in the Bronx, which you said only your most trusted advisors knew about, and your secured lines are being breached, and they used a thermal lance on a steel door that Enzo himself installed and boasted was impregnable. Julian stared at her, his face turning pale. The pieces clicked into place, not just for him, but for Emily as well. Enzo was the one who insisted on Silas coming to pick us up from the building all that day, not him. He said he had an urgent meeting, Emily continued, remembering a detail that had bothered her. And then Silas died. He was the one who would have been able to back up Enzo's story about the EMP if he were still alive. A cold, hard realization dawned in Julian's eyes. Betrayal. Not from an outsider, but from within his most guarded circle. Enzo, the tech wizard, the man who controlled all the information, all the security, the man who could make a warehouse go dark, allow a bomb to be planted, and then lead the enemy straight to the boss. Julian walked to a monitor, punching in commands. He pulled up an old video feed from the garage just before the explosion. They watched in silence as Marcus walked towards the Mercedes. But before he entered, a figure in a maintenance uniform walked past, a tool bag slung over his shoulder. A brief, almost imperceptible nod exchanged with Marcus. The figure had his back to the camera, but something about his posture, the slight hunch of his shoulders. Run a facial recognition on every employee, every contractor, every delivery person who entered the garage in the last 12 hours, Julian ordered, his voice dangerously calm. Focus on anyone connected to Enzo. The system whirred. Moments later, a face flashed on the screen. A young technician who had been working for Enzo's security team for 6 months. A ghost, a pawn. But the seed of doubt about Enzo was planted. He built the network, Julian whispered, his hands clenched into fists. He knew every back door, every vulnerability. He didn't just sell me out, Emily. He orchestrated it. The anger in his voice was chilling, but underneath it, Emily saw something else. Hurt. Deep, profound hurt. Enzo had been like a brother to him. "What are you going to do?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. Julian turned to her, his eyes blazing with a dangerous fire she hadn't seen before. "I'm going to find out how deep this goes, and then I'm going to remind everyone in this city why they fear the name Thorn." He walked towards the secure phone, his stride purposeful. "Marco," he said into the receiver, "it's time to pay a visit to Enzo. Bring him in." Quietly. He hung up, then turned back to Emily. The raw vulnerability was gone, replaced by the ruthless mask of the Mafia boss. "You've proven to be more than just observant, Emily," he said, his eyes scanning her face. "You're smart. You see connections others miss. You don't have the baggage of this life, the blind spots of loyalty. You're an outsider, and right now, that makes you the most dangerous person in my organization." He paused, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "And the most valuable." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The line between being an asset and a prisoner was blurring. She had cleaned his wound, saved his life, and now she had helped him uncover a devastating betrayal. She was deeper in his world than she could have ever imagined. "So," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "what's my new job description, Julian?" He walked toward her, slowly, deliberately. He stopped directly in front of her, his gaze intense. "You're not a maid anymore, Emily," he murmured, his voice a low growl. "You're my eyes, my ears. And for now, My shadow. His hand reached out, not to grab her, but to gently cup her jaw. His thumb brushed her cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a jolt through her. "And you're going to help me burn this city down," he finished, his eyes never leaving hers, "and rebuild it from the ashes." The confrontation with Enzo didn't happen in a dusty back alley or a cold interrogation room. It happened in the opulent ballroom of a discreet, high-end hotel Julian still technically owned. Enzo was brought in, blindfolded, and deposited in the center of the polished marble floor. When the blindfold was removed, he blinked against the glare of a single powerful spotlight. Julian stood opposite him, calm and terrifyingly composed, dressed in a fresh, expensive suit. Emily stood slightly behind him, her presence a silent accusation. "Julian, what is this?" Enzo demanded, his voice trembling slightly, though he tried to project indignation. "The Morettis are hitting us hard. We need to be planning." "We are planning, Enzo," Julian said smoothly, stepping into the spotlight. "I'm planning your retirement." Enzo laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "Retirement? I'm your top advisor. I built your network." "Yes, you did," Julian agreed, walking around him slowly. "And you knew every back door, every kill switch, every weakness. That's why you were so valuable. And that's why, when the Morettis offered you enough money to rebuild your miserable life, you took it. You were the snake in the garden, Enzo." "It's a lie," Enzo shouted, suddenly desperate. "You have no proof. I've been loyal for 15 years. "Loyalty is a myth," Julian scoffed. "Proof is facts, and my maid found them." He gestured to Emily. Emily stepped into the light. She was still wearing a modest dress she had salvaged from the safe house, but her demeanor was different. She wasn't the trembling victim anymore. She was Julian's point of light. "You said Silas died in the EMP blast," Emily said, her voice clear and precise. "But the Moretti hit team didn't use an EMP. They used a thermal lance. That means the power failure was internal. And who controls the internal power grid and the CCTV system, Enzo?" "You do." Enzo sneered at her. "The Maid is a conspiracy theorist." "We checked the garage footage again, Enzo," Julian interjected, his voice dropping to a dangerous baritone. "The cleaning contractor you hired 6 months ago, the one who gave Marcus the nod just before the car bomb detonated. He's your cousin, Luciano Moretti, from the Miami branch. He just changed his last name legally 5 years ago. A ghost in my system, fed by you." Enzo's bravado shattered. His face went slack with shock and defeat. "How did you—" "Emily doesn't look for enemies, Enzo," Julian finished, moving closer. "She looks for pain, and she saw the truth hiding in the little things you missed. Marcus's sweat, the flickering lights, the EMP lie." Julian reached out and grabbed Enzo's tie, just as Emily had grabbed his own. He pulled the older man close, his face etched with cold fury. "You killed Silas," Julian whispered. "You tried to kill me. You betrayed 15 years of trust for a suitcase of cash. You broke the code, Enzo." "They forced me, Julian," Enzo choked out. "My daughter. They threatened her. Please, you know how it is." "The code is everything," Julian spat, pushing him away. He turned to Marco and another enforcer. "Take him. He's no longer my problem. Give him to Rico. Rico knows how to deal with traitors." As Enzo was dragged away, screaming and pleading, Julian stood silent, watching the doors close. The mask of indifference he usually wore was momentarily cracked, revealing the cost of his life. "He was my family," Julian admitted, turning back to Emily. "I know," she said quietly. She walked up to him, and in an unexpected gesture, she reached out and gently smoothed the collar of his shirt, a simple, non-verbal act of comfort. Julian caught her hand, his eyes searching hers. The raw intensity of their shared experience had stripped away the layers of pretense. They were two people who had stared into the abyss together. "You saved me," he repeated, his voice husky. "Again. And you found the cancer. You're more than my eyes, Emily. You're my conscience." "I don't want to be your conscience, Julian," she said, pulling her hand away. "I just want my life back." "You can't have it," he said, his voice flat. "The moment you adjusted my tie, you became a part of this. The Morettis know you exist. They know you're the reason I'm alive. They will come for you. And if I let you walk away, I'm signing your death warrant." "Then what do you want from me?" she challenged, tears welling up. "I'm not a monster like you are. I can't live like this." Julian stepped closer, closing the distance between them. His eyes held a mixture of danger and desperate need. "I want you to stay," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Not as a maid, not as a hostage, as mine. You see the truth. You keep me honest. You're the only person I can trust in this whole damned city." He leaned in, his gaze intense. "I'm offering you protection, wealth, and power. But most importantly, I'm offering you a place where you belong, where you are safe, with me." He lowered his head and gently, fiercely kissed her. It wasn't a soft, romantic kiss. It was a kiss of raw need, of survival, and of the terrifying realization that they were inextricably linked by fate and death. Emily resisted for a moment, then melted into it, years of repressed emotion pouring out. She was trapped, yes, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. Julian Thorne did not retreat into mourning or self-pity after the betrayal of Enzo. He went cold, surgical, and utterly ruthless. The safe house became the command center of a swift, brutal counterattack. His targets were no longer random. Guided by Emily's methodical mind, Julian focused his vengeance on the hidden infrastructure that Enzo and the Morettis had weaponized. "They are too centralized," Emily stated one morning, standing over a digitized network map on Julian's table, her fingers tracing the digital lines. "Enzo made all their security systems dependent on a single encrypted server farm near the Hudson Yards. If you disable that, all their real-time communication goes dark." Julian watched her, a low hum of admiration in his chest. Emily didn't just point out problems. She offered solutions that bypassed brute force, favoring strategic paralysis. "Rico is already mobilizing," Julian said. "He wants to hit their main headquarters, a clean, visible message." "A clean message invites a clear response," Emily countered, looking up from the screen, her dark eyes intense. "You can kill their soldiers, Julian, but you can't kill their system. Enzo sold them the keys to your kingdom. We need to steal theirs. If that server goes dark, they lose control of their financial transfers, their surveillance feeds, and their remote weapons monitoring. That's true vulnerability, not a messy firefight." Julian leaned down, placing his hand over hers on the glowing map. "You think like a CEO, Emily, not a soldier." "I think like someone who is tired of cleaning up blood," she replied, her voice firm. Julian listened. He always listened to her now. He had learned that her lack of experience in the life was her greatest asset. She approached problems without the generational bias and rigid protocols that blinded veterans like Enzo and Silas. The server attack was executed flawlessly 3 nights later. The next day, the entire Moretti network stuttered. Their highly complex, decentralized organization was suddenly deaf and blind. Julian then used the resulting chaos to launch a series of targeted, surgical strikes, guided by the seemingly innocuous ledger entries Emily had flagged. The money laundering pipeline, which relied on the petty cash security fees, was exposed to the IRS and Interpol through anonymous, untraceable drops of information. The climax arrived not in a burst of gunfire, but in a secure, soundproof meeting room in a repurposed bunker in Staten Island. Julian had orchestrated a sit-down with the head of the Moretti family, the aging, paranoid capo, Lorenzo Moretti, under the pretense of negotiating a non-aggression pact. Lorenzo walked into the bunker alone, arrogant and confident, flanked only by his driver, a driver who Julian's men had already vetted and neutralized. "Julian," Lorenzo sneered, his voice raspy with years of cigar smoke and malice. "You look tired, boy. That little maid of yours didn't save you completely, did she? You're hiding in a hole." "I'm not hiding, Lorenzo," Julian replied, standing beside Emily. She wore a simple, tailored black suit that cost more than her former annual salary. Her hair was pulled back, emphasizing her sharp, intelligent features. "I'm consolidating. And I brought the person who found the hole you crawled out of." Lorenzo scoffed, looking Emily up and down with contempt. "A maid? You're trusting a woman who cleans toilets and makes beds? She sees what your whole family misses," Julian stated, his voice a lethal monotone. "The dirt under the fingernails, the loose threads." Emily stepped forward, holding a single micro-printed bank statement, the culmination of weeks of digital forensics on the compromised Moretti network. "You killed Marcus and tried to kill Julian because you were desperate," Emily said, her voice clear, calm, and devastatingly precise. "The logistics contract in Barcelona wasn't yielding enough. Your son, Dante Moretti, was draining the accounts with high-stakes sports gambling. Millions of dollars, which you were funneling through those security fees to cover his debts. You didn't kill Julian for power, Lorenzo. You killed him to cover your son's shame and your financial insolvency." Lorenzo's face went from pale to ashen. The details were too specific, too personal. These were the family secrets that even his most trusted advisors didn't know. "Silence her!" Lorenzo roared, reaching blindly into his coat. But Julian was faster. His gun was drawn, pointed directly at Lorenzo's head. "It's over, Lorenzo," Julian said, his voice flat. "You broke the syndicate's cardinal rule. Don't let personal debt bleed into the business. Dante has already been arrested by Interpol, fed the information by one of my new logistics partners. Your family is finished. Your network is crippled. Your banks are being audited. And every mistake, every secret, was exposed by the woman you dismissed as a maid." The room filled with Julian's men. Lorenzo was surrounded, his reign ending not with a massive gun battle, but with a quiet, calculated exposure of his shame. The Moretti family was dismantled from the inside out. Months later, the Obsidian Tower hummed with a different energy. Julian Thorne didn't reclaim his old life. He built a new one. Emily Andrea stood in Julian's new office, no longer the master suite, but a renovated space on the 55th floor overlooking the park. It was warm, personalized, with soft lighting and a significant security station built discreetly behind a mirrored wall. The maid uniform was a distant memory. She wore a sleek, tailored dark grey suit that spoke of authority and sharp angles. Her title was fluid: chief strategist, personal advisor, the woman who spoke Julian's mind before he did. She walked toward the private elevator, where she knew Julian would appear at any moment. She wasn't carrying a feather duster. She was carrying a stack of confidential reports on Eastern European supply routes. Julian emerged, ready for a high-stakes meeting with powerful contacts in Geneva. He was impeccably dressed, but the ritual remained. "My tie, Julian," she said, stepping toward him, her hands reaching up. "You know the rule." He smirked, leaning slightly into her touch. It feels perfect, Emily, straight as a railroad track. Perfect isn't enough, she murmured, her hand smoothing the silk, tightening the knot. Her eyes, however, weren't checking the knot. They were scanning the room, checking the shadows, looking at the two new, highly trained bodyguards, men she had personally vetted and trusted. She was looking for pain, for tells, for the next threat, forever vigilant. Julian caught her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her palm slowly, reverently. "I asked you once who cleans up after you, Emily," Julian said, his eyes filled with genuine affection and respect, a respect that was harder won than love. "I see the answer now. You clean up the whole damned world. And you protect me while I do it," she replied, meeting his gaze. She had accepted her role in his darkness, but she would never let the darkness swallow her completely. She was the light that exposed the rot. He smiled, a true, non-predatory smile, a terrifyingly handsome man who had found his equal. Always. He adjusted his cufflinks, then offered her his arm. Together, the Mafia boss and the strategist, they walked toward the elevator, stepping into the armored future they had built on the ashes of his past, the unbreakable tie between them, a silent promise. Emily Andrea, the quiet maid, didn't choose the life of darkness, but the darkness chose her. In the space between a frantic whisper and a deadly explosion, she found a terrible power, the power of seeing the truth. She traded her apron for a seat at the table, not as a conquest, but as an indispensable partner to one of the most feared men in the world. Julian Thorne's empire was built on violence, but it was saved by observation. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a warning. The quiet ones, the observers, the ones you dismiss, are the most dangerous. They hold the secrets. They see the fear. They adjust the tie. If you loved this deep dive into the true cost of loyalty and the intoxicating power of a ruthless, real-life love story, smash that like button. Tell me in the comments, would you have jumped the 10-foot gap? Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a dose of high-stakes drama. And most importantly, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the next chapter of The Shadows.